Welcome, everyone. My name is Kristen Miller-Zone. I'm the Executive Director of Costume Society of America, and I welcome you all to today's webinar. Please allow me to introduce our moderator, Kathy K. Mullet. Dr. Mullet is an emerita faculty at the Oregon State University. She has served Costume Society as National Treasurer from 2000 to 2006, VP of Education and Programs 2010 to 12, and then President from 2014 to 2016. In 2015, she became a CSA Fellow. I will turn it over to her to introduce the two additional fellows with whom we will be speaking today, Rosalyn Lester and Judith Mathey.
Great, thank you so much, Kristen. So as Kristen mentioned, our two fellows, CSA fellows that we're going to be speaking to today are Dr. Rosalyn Lester, who I would say is one of the founding members of the endowment. And then we have Judy Mathey, who's also a CSA fellow, who was really instrumental in being our fund manager and making sure that the endowment developed into what it is today. So I'm going to let them do more of a introduction of how they got started and how the endowment actually came into being. And I'll turn that over to Rosalyn, because I think she was really the brainchild of why Costume Society needed an endowment. So if you would, Rosalyn, tell us how you came up with this idea, or why you came up with this idea.
Thank you, Kathy. I was a member of the CSA board at that time, an officer, and every time I would go to meetings and we would be dealing with the budget and how we wanted to spend what money we had a mission of funding grants and awards for the organization. But our list of grants and awards always seemed to be longer than the amount of money that we had available to support them. That was one reason I felt we needed something. The second reason was every time I would go to a board meeting, someone like Phyllis Speck or some of the other, or Judy, or some of the other, I don't want to say more mature people on the board, but people who had been serving in the organization in a leadership role for a long time would turn to me and point their finger and say, you folks need to come up with something so that those of us, as we are writing up our wills and things like that, we will feel comfortable allocating money to the Costume Society, because we want to know that there is a sound, secure recipient of our money and that it will be used wisely. With those two experiences, I was attending a meeting in San Diego, California with my husband, who was training to be a district governor for Rotary International. That required a week of intensive training, and the spouse had to go along because he or she was expected to be an equal partner. These sessions went on for a week, morning, noon, and night, and certain of the sessions focused on the Rotary Endowment. And every time I would hear them say something about their endowment, I kept thinking, CSA could do that. That's what CSA needs. So I came home and immediately got in touch with the director, the association manager at that time, Kay Kittle Boyer, and I said, Kay, here's an idea that I want to work with, and we need to get it started, and I need some people, and help me think about the people who can work with us. But I said, one of the people that I think might be good is that somebody's going to have to know how to invest and manage the money, and that's not my talent. But I remember this couple in California at one of the board meetings that I went early on in my membership, and they were talking to the board about how to manage the money to make it grow. And that's how Judy Mathey got approached to be a part of the group. She was the female in that couple talking about how to manage the money. So I called Judy and she said, well, yes, I think I could do that. And then we started saying, well, we've got to have more than just Judy and myself. Who else can we get? Where else can we find people? Who else has talent and experience? Because it needs to be somebody's working on this need to be people who represent the organization across the US and Canada. And it needs to be people who have dealt with investing money or investing their money and have a concept of how we're going to do this. We had our first organizational meeting in San Diego at our symposium. And we gathered together and around the table and introduced ourselves and talked about what we had in mind, what mission it was. And I remember as I walked out, Kay Boyer turned to me and said, well, now you are officially organized. And we were. And then we started pulling in people who could help us, who had experience in this area.
And so at the San Diego meeting, I was elected as treasurer. Colleen Gow, I remember, was made secretary. And in the future years, maybe the next year, the year after, when I was appointed as fund manager, working with the investments with Debbie Elms, it was Carolee Smith who was then appointed as the treasurer.
The next part of this is that you have to work hard to make people believe that you are doing the honest and the best things. And you have to be very convincing. And so every time we had a symposium after that, we did things that would help people understand what we were trying to do. If there was a program going on at a particular time, one of us stood up and said, this program is being sponsored by, or the cost for this program is being covered by the CSA endowment. The money you have given, we invest the money you give us, but we do not spend it. We spend only our earnings, only what we earn. And we just kept saying that over and over again. And then we'd approach some folks and say, wouldn't you like to support this? And then we said, well, you really have to work at raising this money. So when people would come to symposium, if they had donated sometime during the year, their conference badge had a special label on it so that it stood out saying, I have given. And we then said, well, they need sort of a social get together. So we decided that everybody who had contributed, even if they didn't contribute until they got to that symposium, would come to a little reception one evening before they'd go out to dinner. And so the members of the endowment board or committee, whatever you want to call it, were told to bring certain kinds of refreshments. Our refreshments were milk and cookies. And so if you wanted to come and visit, you could come and have a glass of milk, and you could have a cookie or two and visit. And that was more special recognition because you weren't eligible for milk and cookies if you had not contributed to the endowment. Even if you contributed as you walked in the door, that made you eligible to attend. And we said, we need to do more recognition. So we formed a group called the Dress Society. And the Dress Society had levels of giving in it. And in the newsletter then, we would publish the membership in the Dress Society, just sort of like you see at your college and university catalogs you get, and you get so many they've contributed within, say, a $2,000 or $5,000 range or what have you. So we did that for the Costume Society. And we would post a list of who had contributed and the level, not the actual dollars that they gave, but that they were in a certain level of contributing. When it got close to the end of the year, and if someone had not contributed, we would call or contact them and say, you are a member of the Dress Society, and we really want you to retain that membership. Therefore, we want to remind you that we haven't received a contribution from you this year, and we would love to keep you on this list, because if you go off this list, you have to give for so many consecutive years before you can get back onto the list. And I think it was 3 years. Kathy or Judy, do you all remember I don't remember what the specific number was, but the
It was
fact 5. Oh,
5.
goodness gracious.
Yeah.
That was even better because, oh, they didn't want to get off the list. So
Yeah.
even if they gave us $5, they were back on the list. But, you know, no gift was too small and no gift was too large. And we had gifts of all sizes. But you really had to work at it. And you had to talk to them. If when you were at symposium, it was easier face to face. I don't think you have supported the endowment. Think about it. And Kathy is the treasurer. She'd love to receive a check from you or whatever. Or Judy would be glad to have something from you that she can invest. And it takes one-to-one, and it takes asking, and it takes thank you notes afterwards, and it takes recognition at the meetings, and it takes special parties at the meetings. And that's the way we raised the money we have. And with good markets and good investments on Judy's part, and I'll have to say, Judy worked very hard at this, and she made the decisions herself as to what we invested in. Because I saw her husband at a meeting, and we knew that he worked for an investment organization, and he said, I want you to know she makes those decisions herself. I tell her of good prospects or good possibilities, and that's the end of my part. And she has to decide if she thinks it's the right one. Well, she's got a good brain because she always made good decisions, and our investments grew and grew and continue to grow.
And I'll ask Judy, is like, do you remember about how much you actually started with? I know, having been treasurer, we really had no money to, I think we decided that there was maybe $10,000 was what we could actually give to the endowment at the very beginning to get it started. But
Well, you're right, Kathy. And that money prior to the endowment being formed was really garnered, I think, by Rosalyn and Phyllis Specht and Alicia Annis in San Diego gave just to begin to start an endowment, but with no structure at all. And so when we met in San Diego, as Rosalyn said, we met in San Diego, but it was the next symposium in New Orleans that was the most important for the formation, because two important decisions were made then. One was that our goal would be $25,000 a year, and it was just pulled out of the air, you know, maybe caking somebody to say, well, how about $25,000? And everybody kind of nods. And I mean, no basis whatsoever, but there it was. And the second important thing at our second meeting was we realized it would take an awfully long time to build up enough interest and dividends, earnings, in other words, to even fund one $500 award. And our target was more or less the Amelia Davenport Publications Award. So at New Orleans, we decided we would take that $500 out of principal, and we would make that award the next year. Because the importance of that was to show that the endowment was viable, that we could do something. And so it was, I think, about 3 more years that we only funded that $500 award. Until then, we were able to pick up the Richard Martin Award. So then we were funding $1,000 a year. And to reemphasize what Rosalyn said, we only spent the earnings, which was the interest in the dividends from investing. And as I've said so often, the years that the endowment started were really such, it was always good to start at the bottom, because then all you can do is go up. And, you know, it was in the, 06, 07, but 08, 09, if you remember, Obama had just been elected. He brought in Tim Geithner and that fellow from Goldman Sachs, I forget his name, and you know, they were trying to hold banks together and everything. And here we had this little $10,000. And so we could virtually only grow and go up. And we had a couple of years that were static, let's put it that way. But it was with Debbie Elms. The endowment kept Debbie Elms, which had assisted CSA from very early on. I think Kay Boyer is the one who brought her on board. And she was a wonderful gal, but she dealt only in mutual funds, or I shouldn't say only, but for us, that was what she wanted CSA to be in, and they had been in. But mutual funds can be very expensive and the earnings can be very low percentage-wise. And so because of my involvement with Bob throughout his entire career, when we were young, I worked at I. Magnin and Company in Los Angeles, and we had one car, and he'd drop me off of work, pick me up, we'd go home. After a day's work, we'd have our little dinner, whatever it was, went back down to his office. And it was there that he started acquiring his clients. And I sat there and wrote the envelopes and addressed them to send out the material. And I got to know a lot about his business just through osmosis, although I was never involved with it. And so with CSA, then it was more or less natural for me, although always consulting him, and he would always give me, several choices. And I would weigh them as to what the interest was. What the potential, what that fund was investing in, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of different criteria. And then I'd say, well, I think this one is right for CSA. And so Debbie Elms just let me have my way naturally. And she was gracious enough just to go along. But finally, she became a convert, I think, to my way of doing it for CSA. And the way I set it up is that the earnings each month were then transferred to a bank account. So, starting in July and August and September, our fiscal year beginning in June, we began to see their earnings add up. And it was pretty nice because then going into the usually May-June symposium, for the next year, my report would detail what honors, awards, and projects, because don't forget, Rosalyn, we did projects. That's how we could do the Angels, and we started funding the Angels Fund. But anyway, and the point is that in my board report, which I sent out early then, the trustees could see how much money they could allocate for that year. And it got to be so every year they had a couple of $1,000s to allocate to new projects, new awards, or existing, I should say, not new, but existing awards. And so I've said enough, but yeah, those were heady years, just amazing.
One of the projects that I had hoped that we'd be able to continue with the endowment was two meetings that CSA sponsored before we got the endowment going. One was in New Jersey, and the other was in California. And they were both introduced by CSA members and supported and sold to the group that was important for us to do. The one, not New Jersey, it was Delaware. It was at Winter Tour. And CSA members presented papers and the Winter Tour staff presented papers. Winter Tour is a marvelous museum, not known directly for having a costume collection, but obviously having textiles in their collection. And so we included a board meeting along with this particular full day meeting that was held at Winter Tour and sponsored by CSA and Winter Tour. And I remember walking out of one of the sessions, and I walked past one of the Winter Tour curators who was sitting in and listening and participating in the meeting. And she said, "My goodness gracious, I have been misinterpreting some of these paintings that I've been talking about. I did not know what the clothing represented. I did not know what it meant, because the way they had dressed was indicative of the times and expressing certain kinds of characteristics." I've been doing this incorrectly. And I thought, this was worth every penny that we had put into that, because we had to split the cost with Winterthur. And I said, we were helping to educate other people about costume, the value and the role of costume. Several years later, Phyllis Speck came up with a similar idea in Pasadena, and we went to the museum in which she worked as a curator, she and her husband, and did the same kind of thing. We had a board meeting tied in with it. We had the day meeting at the museum there. And again, was not a museum affiliated with costume collections per se, but both of those museums had the biggest attendance at any of their functions the day they came to the CSA costume presentation along with that museum. We filled their rooms, and they said, we have never had this many people come to our special program. So proved they were really interesting. And I thought, okay, we've done 2 regions now. If we could do another region about every 3 years or so, that would be a good time. Eventually, we would have spread this throughout North America. Well, we've only gotten 2, so I hope some of the membership will pick up this push and get going on some more, because that helps Costume Society and the understanding of the role of costume in our lives.
Judy, Vicki Berger has signed in or had a comment. She said that she remembers when you and Bob gave a workshop to the National Board, and how important that was in helping the board understand, really how this whole thing would work, and probably how we were actually able to develop or gain as much money as we have over the years. And I will agree that, having someone come in and explain to you, going, okay, if you do this and this, that's going to help you. Well, you might mention that about that actual project that you and Bob presented, or workshop that you presented to National.
Yeah, well, it was at LACMA, actually. I think it was the 18th century, Edward Mader's big, huge blowout exhibit there. And they hosted the symposium that year. And Bob indeed was invited. And I think I was a member of the board, but I didn't invite him. The board invited him. And he did. He really helped explain, what the situation was. And this is long before the endowment. But I think it just stayed with people, stayed with the board members, because they understood what he was saying. Bob has a wonderful way of explaining things. And I must say that Bob Mathey, in his own quiet way, has made a big, big contribution to CSA in this financial area. And it was under Robin Campbell that Bob was given the President's Award, and I think it was the 3rd time it had been given in all those years. And it was, I forget the year it was given, but anyway, he received that. And I was always grateful to CSA and grateful to Robin and the board of directors for even thinking of doing something like that for Bob, and appreciated it, because he did. That was a big thing. And when we began with our $25,000 miracle number, to reach, we did that for probably 10 years straight. And the way we were helped to reach it were first of all bequests. The first year of fundraising with the $25,000 goal was a bequest, and then Sally Baker, and then it was Ruth Hawthorne who gave us a bequest the next year. And then, not a bequest, but a wonderful gift from Carol Spencer, and she was with Mattel and retired at that point, but she had the Barbie doll. So she put it at auction publicly, not for CSA, but she divided the funds. She got $10,000 for that doll, and she gave the endowment $5,000. So it was wonderful. And then we had a couple of big contributors early on that were part of our membership. And one of them was rather a new member, but they said, Sure. How much do you need to make the $25,000, you know? And, you know, and at that point it was probably 4 or something. And so that person contributed, and it was just, you know, really a wonderful camaraderie. And when Rosalyn talks about the promotion, you know, a lot of people are afraid of promotion, or they don't know how to do promotion, or when they do it, they're booed and said, oh, you shouldn't be doing that at a CSA meeting. And Rosalyn and I would beg the president and say, please, just 30 seconds, just 1 minute at the annual meeting. And then she would get up or I would get up. And then Ann Bissonnette was just so great because she did one of those thermometers, you know. Every Rotary and every place that you know has a thermometer.
United Fund.
$25,000 on the top, right? And and at the symposium, it would be on a, I think once or twice we had it on a board, but I could be wrong on that. But I know definitely she had the technical knowledge to put it on a slide. And so it was on the slide as members would come in for a lecture here, there. And it was great, but it was just the two of us getting up, and some people took exception to that and said, you shouldn't be doing it, but we believe so much, and it made a difference. It just makes a difference. And like the thank you notes that Rosalyn was talking about. So.
And Sally Helveston Gray made us a big, tall poster that we started carrying, fabric thing that we started carrying around to the different meetings that promoted the endowment. It didn't have a certain amount. It just talked about the endowment, and that went in the lobby, or it went into the meeting room, or wherever. That was a nice promotion bit too.
Yeah, and we really started putting more and more emphasis every time, you know, one of the awards presentations was up. There was the mention that this was, you know, basically funded by the endowment. So
yeah, and also we can't forget Ann Bissonnette's wonderful role in bringing Betty Kirk, who was then alive, and her family, who gave $25,000 for the Betty Kirk Award. Just imagine that. And we said that we needed enough to bring in $750, I think is what that award is. And about 3%, we really, I think even 2.5%, we said we'd have to earn on a certain amount of money. And they were so generous to do that. And Ann worked a long time with the board of directors to finally effect that and bring it in to have an award named by after a member. So that was very important.
And I guess we should also sort of talk about the fact that the endowment actually was its own entity until we found out that in order for it to basically function within the organization, it could not be its own entity. But it really did start out, you know, with its directors that basically functioned separate from the national board. And the endowment, you know, as we know, was really responsible for fundraising and trying to get us some money that we could then use for the awards and grants, because I know whenever I was treasurer, there were years that you know, we were saying we can't give an award because we don't have any money. And it just became very difficult because you know, people wanted to apply for different awards, and if it wasn't going to be funded, you know, it's like, okay, well, I'm no use in getting this stuff together if there's no money there. So, you know, endowment now being able to fund all the awards and grants has really made that fabulous for the organization, that we're not sort of nickeling and diming trying to figure out where we're going to get money.
Well, and what happened, if I could explain, that none of us were aware of, is that the Rotary Endowment was a totally separate nonprofit.
Oh, right.
And just like our hospital up here has an endowment and foundation, which is run totally separately. And so we found out after 10 years in or so that we had two boards for one nonprofit organization. We had the board of directors, and then we had the board of trustees, and that wasn't viable. So either we had to break out, CSA had to break out and have a separate trustee foundation nonprofit status, or they had to bring the endowment into a finance committee underneath the board of directors. And so that's what happened, but we functioned as separate identities, although Rosalyn was just really, really very savvy and intelligent about how she formed her first board of trustees, because she included the present president, the past president, the president-elect of CSA in, and so the board of directors was always just directly involved with the board of trustees. But that, I think, should be in the record as to exactly why it then became subsumed again under the board of directors, and the trustees no longer exist.
And I guess, Rosalyn, you might want to address a little bit about who all was, or the different parts of that original endowment group included. You know, you mentioned the president and the past president and president-elect, but and we have Judy as the financial. What other positions were in that original board, and what were their responsibilities?
We always had, as they were mentioning, the officers or the president, at least of the organization, because that individual needed to know what we were talking about, and we needed to know what the organization felt we needed to do. So it was important to have the current president, and it was also important to have people who had been active in the organization that had a feeling for what could be done or what the potential was. So people who were on there, unless they had a strong experience in costume society or working with costume, or a strong background experience in investments or whatever, we didn't have the brand new members to the organization necessarily, because they needed to develop that kind of feeling and commitment and responsibility for the fundraising. I remember at one of the meetings, Kay King was doing a fundraiser in which she came in with these big fancy rings that had sparkles and whatever all over them, and was selling the rings to make money for put into the endowment. And so we all would ante up $5 or $10 or whatever she was selling the rings for, and we would go around through the meeting with our blingy rings on, and just fun things like that. It was a fun thing, as well as something that was building a good financial base for our organization.
That was Las Vegas.
Was it Las Vegas? Okay.
Perfect for bling rings. Perfect for bling rings.
We all had bling rings.
You know, Rosalyn,
right.
I remember that your concept was, and ours was, that we would not have any trustee that didn't have a job. In other words, nobody's just sitting around and they're a trustee and that's all. But I can't remember the different assignments we had. Probably we had.
June Beauvais wrote a lot of our thank you notes, which was a double purpose. It thanked them for the contribution, and it gave them a record for their taxes if they wanted to file for the taxes. But you're right, everybody had to have some kind of a responsibility. Barbara Brudeau has done some of that. I think she's done some of the
Yeah,
writing,
Barbara was
the notes.
took care of who had donated. One comment that Anne wanted, Anne Bissonette would like Judy to address is the fact that she was, Judy realized that our management PMA was really interested in getting a hold of the endowment money, and it was under Judy's wise or eagle eye and way of investing that PMA never really got a hold of.
Well,
PMA was our basically our Kristen
Kay
at
Boyer
that time.
retired. Kay Boyer retired. PMA took over, and then Kristen came in after PMA left. I think,
Right.
isn't that the sequence?
Yes,
yes,
yes.
exactly.
And
Uh-huh.
and actually we discussed it the other day that that transition from PMA to Kristen was the only year that we didn't make our $25,000 in donations. But as I will say, at that time we were just as the national board, because I was president at the time, that the national board was what was holding the organization together until Kristen could come on board. But one of the reasons that we really needed to move away from PMA was the fact that they were costing us a lot of money, and I think Judy was smart enough to say, you know, let's keep that money separate out of the general fund, and that the endowment is not something that a management company needed to hold on to. And I think Judy was very instrumental in making sure that our endowment stayed intact.
Well, you're
And
right.
you might be able to address a little bit about how you were able to keep that intact.
So maybe I should back up and just say that when the endowment was formed, I lived in, and still do, live in Mendocino, California. And so I went to the local post office and opened a post office box just for the endowment with the endowment name on it, so that all the contributions could be sent then to that address. In addition, I went to the local Wells Fargo bank, but it was important that they were a national bank because of our national membership. Anyway, I went to them and opened an account just for the endowment. It was a checking account. And that is the account then that I made the donor deposits in. So I would get, the checks would be mailed to the PO box. I would get them and I would make out the deposit slip and deposit the donations there. And they rested there until I was ready to, through the computer, transfer funds from Wells Fargo to Morgan Stanley, where Debbie was our account advisor. And then she would make the investment with that money. Well, by the time the 10 years were up, which I was given 10 years, I think I had 6 years, and then I was given another 6 years as an exception to be the fund manager. And we were heading up toward $400,000 as far as the funds go. And that was very exciting indeed. And I based that on not what the stock market or the market was doing, but I based that on what the contributions were. You know, a lot of investment people don't care at all what the original amount of money went in. It's just what the market value is. But for me, I care very much what the original amount of money is. And then if If the market value is higher is fine, and if it's lower, well, it's not so good. But people were just wonderful. They'd come up to the symposium secretively and say, "Oh, Judy, here's $100, for the endowment," or something like that. And Rosalyn had the same thing happen. We'd get all the board of trustees to stand up at the general meeting, so people would know who they could go in and talk to and donate.
One of the final questions I had asked or wanted you all to think about was, where do you think we should be going with the endowment? What do you think should be the next steps for Costume Society and supporting some things? Rosalyn mentioned these regional projects or sort of collaborations. Do you see any other areas that you think we should be promoting or increasing the awards and grants that we're offering now?
Well, I was thinking about it. Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more with Rosalyn's ideas of these special meetings, such as the Huntington had and Winter Tour. It's a big, enormous effort on the part of a region. But even if it's done in a smaller scale, and Phil Specht is certainly around, certainly for consultation on how she did it those many years ago. And whoever did Winter Tour, I'm sure, or somebody there would have some memory of it, some CSA person. I was thinking, though, it's easy for me to say, oh, well, you should increase the number of awards, make up more awards. But I realize that's easy to say, but that has difficulties, of coming up with an award idea. But like Ann Bissonnette did with the Betty Kirk Fund, and I see nothing wrong with naming grants and awards after founders or after important people in the field. The other thing that you mentioned, Kathy, about money is, well, I've heard from several awardees that, it's not the money, it's the prestige. That's what should count. Mm-hmm. And of course, a little extra money would help. Maybe we can be in the position where we can do like the award plus a big amount of money. I'm thinking the MacArthur grant or some of those other enormous grants out there. Okay, if we could do that in a small way, the award plus a nice amount of money. But I don't know. I still think we should rely on the prestige. After all, we have a travel research grant. So somebody can apply for that. Ann Bissonnette did, and many others, to great success. So I don't know, Rosalyn, what do you think?
I think that as important as costume and dress is, that we need to do things that help people recognize that importance and value and recognize us as an association who works in that field. When I go out and say, oh, I've got a costume society meeting, people say, what's that? What are you doing? And that was one of the things that I felt that the Pasadena meeting and the Winter Tour meeting began to help people, even people who were working with costume, know more about this organization, because we're made up of such a diversity of members that it's important for people to know about us, to know what we're doing, the research that we're doing, the Angels projects that we're doing. I remember I remember from Rhode Island who did a lot of study on sounds sort of silly, but she was looking at the effects of deterioration on fabrics that got into water or soil or whatever, and that was research that was important to help people know what was done years ago and how we could build on it to improve today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right, Rosalyn. Outreach.
Yes.
Outreach. Yeah. Oh, that's so good, Kathy. you have to bring this to the board of directors. Okay, we don't want the endowment to look inward and create, with great trouble and trauma, it seemed to me at times, a new award or a new project. We need maybe a new, or under the outreach, the director who does outreach, we need to do outside things to do affect just what Rosalyn was talking about. And
Well, even the publication things. We used to work with Texas Tech, and now Kent State has taken over the costume series of publications.
Yeah.
I think people probably are not even aware of the books that our members are producing. That's history and it's stories and it's information. That outreach is a good word. That's anything that we can do to make our work more visible, our field more visible, because it's a bedrock of our society. The field is.
well, that's true. Now, I'm not on FaceTime and on those kinds of things, but I think the Kristen Zone, I know she's very adept at the technical standpoint, from the technical standpoint, and I'm sure she has us in those kinds of things. But somehow we've got to be physical as well. Maybe we've got to start attending some, well, when gatherings can begin again. Yeah, we can start attending some ancillary groups, quilt shows, or that's a terrible example, but your brains can start going, and the board of directors maybe should come up with a list of geographical areas in the United States where the regions know about some things that would connect with us.
Well, and I think we're making sort of inroads in this, and just these webinars that we're doing. I mean, these are now going to be out there to where people are going to be able to have access to this.
So endowment money maybe should be spent in that way for the progress of those, and a rather rapid progress. Things change so fast. There must be stumbling blocks for new awards, creating new awards, and for adding money to the older awards. And stumbling blocks are opinions, and they're also just somebody to take it and move it forward. And so maybe through outreach, somebody could get enthused. I don't think that a director would be enthused about, oh, let's see now, how much money should we increase the Amelia Davenport? Well, if we do, then what about the Richard Martin? Well, how about the Adele Filey? That kind of thing. It gets to be rote and old hat. And I really love this outreach idea, and maybe it would excite somebody.
And I see we do have some people like Ann Bissonette and Vicki Berger who have been part of this group for a long time. I know under Rosalyn started out as the chair, and then was it Ann that then came in after you?
Yeah, I think so. But she served for a couple of years as chair as well.
Vicki did make the comment that originally and I know whenever I came in as treasurer, it was after Vicki had been treasurer, that Costume Society had CDs as their investments. And I think Vicki was also the one who had the checking to where she actually wrote checks, to pay for various things and all. So we've come a long way.
Well, it's so amazing, Kathy, that you bring that up. I was remembering that early on, I guess it was the 1980s, I was corresponding secretary to the board of directors. Yeah, Kay Boyer as ED would send me the letters. I would type up the answers and snail mail them. And some were out of the country, right? Oh my gosh. And then, it was just an amazing leap. It is just an amazing leap when we think back, isn't it? Oh my.
Well, I'd like to thank you ladies so much for this wonderful conversation and for giving us the history of the endowment. And here's to much future growth. Huzzah for the endowment and all that it does.
Yes. Please give. Don't forget to your end of the year or out actually now the beginning of the next year.
And I want to thank everyone for attending today. If you'd like to get more information about future digital content or our publications or even becoming a member, please visit costumesocietyamerica.com. And you can also follow us on social media. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Kristen.
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all. Lovely to see you.